Welcome to the Extended Gamut Podcast, Episode 1. I'm Jeff.
I'm Andy.
And today we're going to answer questions that cover a bunch of technologies and dive into some of the finer points that we weren't able to cover in some of our most recent YouTube videos.
Yeah. So we've got on the docket today, we've got some questions about heat transfer vinyl, specifically on the new HP Latex printers. Questions about Epson EdgePrint. Some diagnosing of dye sub blurriness. So we're going to jump right into those.
Yeah, these questions and more will be answered on today's episode of the Extended Gamut Podcast. All right, Andy, should we jump in?
Let's do it. We don't want to waste people's time.
We got a lot to cover on this inaugural episode of the Extended Gamut Podcast. So, question 1 recently came in on one of our YouTube videos was, can the new HP Latex units print on heat transfer vinyl?
Yeah. So that's the Latex 700 and Latex 800. This was on one of those videos. So the short answer is yes, that the new latex printers can print on heat transfer vinyl. I looked in the HP, the media locator. So that's the library that HP has in the cloud for different manufacturers' media. You can pull down and use them on your own printer. So I looked in there. There aren't any 700 and 800 profiles for heat transfer vinyl. But if you look back at the previous generation, there's plenty. So
300, 500, is that what we're talking about?
300 and 500. So Chemica and Sizer both have 4 or 5 different of each of their vinyls that are available for the 300 and 500. So it's good news and bad news. We know that anything that prints on the 300 and 500 in terms of vinyl is going to print well with the 700 and 800 because it's lower temperatures, and you should have no issue with that. But you're going to have to do some of your own profiling, so it's going to be an extra step. But you really shouldn't have a problem. If you look at the manufacturers' websites, they both will show which ones are HP certified, HP Latex certified, and any of those should print really well on 700 and 800.
Okay, good. So you could do it on the 300, 500, and the 700, 800 doesn't really create a situation where you wouldn't be able to do it, but because of curing temperatures and speeds and different print heads, you might have to adjust the profile.
Yeah, so HP doesn't have one that's provided in their media locator.
Okay.
You'd have to make your own.
But still able to do it.
Yeah. And so I think the comment said that he was having some issues. So it may be that some of the settings and the ink limitations, some of that needs to be dialed in. Might be something to talk to the manufacturer about, whichever heat transfer vinyl you're using, or check out Chemica and Sizer.
Chemica, spelled like the word chemical without an L and not pronounced in any way like chemical.
Yeah. Basically named so that you can look like a fool if you don't know how it's supposed to be.
Possibly.
I did it.
All right, next question.
This one is on one of our Epson F170 videos, and it's about the naming. So they had asked, is the F170 the same as the F100 model? So what do you think?
This was confusing to me as well. I had a chance to travel over to Europe to a couple trade shows, and I was looking at some printers, and that's when I started noticing, wow, you have a printer that looks just like a printer we sell in the United States, and it has a different number.
Yeah.
And that's when I first realized, specifically here, Epson uses a different naming convention in different regions of the world.
Yep.
So for Europe, they use F100, and in the US, they use F170.
Yeah, and it's often the ending 1 or 2 digits that are different by region. So a lot of it, there's a lot of crossover. So when we do a video on the F170, someone in Europe, you're going to have a similar control panel. Everything's going to be very, very similar. It's usually just a different SKU and then different inks, different ways that, you can use the printer.
Yeah, so that answers it in terms of why it's different. But yes, those are essentially the same printer. One, if you bought an F170, it would be called an F100 in Europe. and
Well,
vice
yeah,
versa.
and one thing. So we did a video on ink costs where we talked about how the F170 ink cost is 95% cheaper than Sawgrass, a similar Sawgrass printer. Ink cost, that's one thing that's going to be different across regions, right? So thinking that you're going to save 95% in Europe, you may not. We aren't sure how Epson, what their strategy is for selling ink within
Yeah.
Europe.
All right, good. All right, question 3. Can I sublimate onto cotton shirts?
Yeah, this is always there's a couple different ways to do shirts, and so people have questions of which shirt can I do on which technology.
We could just say no, but since this is the extended Gamut podcast, we are going to try to go a little deeper and explain why we would say no,
Yeah,
and maybe give some options for someone that's asking this question.
yeah. So the answer is no. Sublimation is a dye, and that dye will only color or dye polyester fabrics. So you're not going to have any results with trying to heat press, changing your temperature or your time or any of that. No matter what you do, that dye is not going to affect a natural fiber in a way that gives you a nice print. So if you want to use a cotton garment, the way to do that is with DTG printing.
Direct to garment.
Yep. And so that's the exact opposite. So DTG printing is made to use natural fibers like cotton, and you may be able to use some blends that have some polyester, but the more polyester or synthetic materials that are within the blend, the less vibrant, the less that ink is going to adhere. And so DTG is an ink. It goes over the top of the surface, and sublimation is a dye, which is actually fused into the fabric itself.
This question wasn't asked specifically, but couldn't you spray on? I've seen somewhere where they spray on a polyester something onto a cotton shirt. Is that a
Like a pre-treat?
yeah?
Yeah, there's different. Epson has one. We haven't had great results.
Yeah.
It's not the best way to do polyester, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So,
But that could be a way that someone says, "No, I can do it. I can." But you're essentially putting another layer between cotton
Yeah.
and this dye so that it has something to
the ink.
dye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing, the other way you could look at doing this, and we just filmed a video. It'll go live sometime soon on DTF printing. And so if you wanted to
Direct to film transfer.
Yeah, so if you wanted to have one printer that kind of did everything, this would allow you to use your DTG printer to print to a film that could then be applied to a polyester fabric, polyester garment. So if you're interested in that, we do a step-by-step video, and that's going to come soon. It'll tell you exactly how to use your Epson F2100 or F30 printer to do direct-to-film transfer printing.
Okay. All right. Next question had to do with the PageWide XL Pro. Is the PageWide XL Pro suitable for quality graphics printing? That is a. This has been a wild release for this printer, and it's got so many things that it does like so well, and people are just trying to find what's the niche for it. And I think the person that was watching I think it was a wrapping paper video, and someone made a comment and they asked a question about this.
Yeah. So this question is really tough because what does quality mean? And that's so subjective. But I guess the PageWide is like any other printer that we sell in that it has its strengths and it has its limitations, and you have to find out if it works best for your environment. So the PageWide, he specifically asked about banding. And with the PageWide, it actually doesn't band like our other inkjet printers do, but they call it stitching. So because the printhead isn't moving back and forth across the surface of the media, there's nowhere for it to band where, the head moves, it advances, the head moves, it advances. There's nowhere for there to be a gap or an overlap. But what it does have is an array of 8 print heads across, and so where the media is passing underneath and these 8 print heads are aligned, You could have places where one, print head number 6 and print head number 7 are laying at different densities of ink. And so you could see some striping, which HP calls stitching.
Okay.
And that's a real thing. That is legitimate. That happens, and HP isn't really even trying to hide it. The HP is like, we've made a printer that prints 100 times faster than everything else. So we know there's a market for this. Some people want things 100 times faster.
Yeah.
But it isn't going to be an archival inkjet Giclée printer.
All right, so let's get to another question. Can I create ICC profiles in Epson's EdgePrint software?
Yeah, this is a question that we received about EdgePrint, but there's also been a couple other questions about EdgePrint. So this is a good forum to be able to talk about it a little bit more. So EdgePrint is Epson's RIP software, their light version, light duty RIP software to drive their printers. And not all their printers even, just some of them. So it started to ship with the V7000 flatbed, with the R resin R5070, the dye sub printers.
Yeah,
so,
the F63.
Yep.
Yeah.
So where they used to bundle Wasatch, now they have their own product to be able to bundle their printers with. And so it has some limitations. It's not going to be the tool that everyone needs. So let's talk through, where it fits and what it can and can't do. So ICC Profiles was this question, and it can't. So it can't create ICC profiles. That's one of the limitations. And Epson has created a lot of stock profiles for each of those platforms and has them ready to go. So it should fit most people's needs. But if you're color critical or you're going to have a certain product that you're trying to produce that's maybe outside of what Epson may have profiled already, then you're going to need a RIP software that's going to allow you the ability to generate ICC profiles. So that's one limitation. And while we're talking about it, we can go through a couple other things that you can't do with EdgePrint.
Cut. Can you cut?
You can add cut marks, but you can't crop marks. You can't add cut marks for a Suma or a Graphtec or a Zund.
So you can't drive cutters.
You cannot drive cutters, so you can't generate cut files with Epson EdgePrint. And you also can't, this is probably obvious, but you can't drive other manufacturers' printers. So if you have a couple Epson printers and an HP printer, you're going to need to have a software to run that HP printer. So that could be something, most people don't want to have a bunch of different softwares to drive all their different printers. They'd like to have one.
And if you have a bunch of printers, you probably already have a RIP software and you're just adding a seat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think EdgePrint fits really well for the customer that is buying one printer or two printers of the same platform and wants to be able to use them for free. So it's bundled for free with those printers, and free is good, especially if you're starting a business or new to printing and you've just spent a bunch of money on a printer and you're taking a risk, then free is really a good way to get started.
And if that didn't answer enough of everyone's questions, I know we actually just filmed a video that sort of shows a walkthrough of EdgePrint and some of the things. So that's coming out soon. But hopefully that helps answer your question on, can I create ICC profiles? All right, moving on. It's our last question. I'm getting blurry transfers. And obviously that's probably super frustrating.
Yeah. This was on the...
you like print the transfer, you heat your heat press up, you get your whatever you're going to transfer onto, a mug or something. Then you put it all together, and then when you go to look at it, now you've got a ruined mug. You've already printed a transfer. I mean, that...
Yeah, this was on the Epson F170, one of those videos. And, that's super frustrating, especially because it's the last step in the process. So we were just going to talk through some of the things that could cause that issue where you press and it's blurry or it's dull, or the image just doesn't look vibrant.
And we're just going to give a couple ideas. Obviously, if we were having a one-on-one conversation, we could ask some clarifying questions and probably get to the root, but we'll just try to cover a couple different things that we think it could be, and hopefully that's helpful for people.
So we can start at the print. If the print looks good, if it's not blurry on the printed transfer paper, that's a good first step. If it is blurry on the transfer paper, it's still going to be blurry when you go to transfer it. And so if it's blurry, it's probably something with a head alignment or feed adjustment, or maybe the file itself is being printed too large for the resolution.
I've even seen blurriness happen on grander scales when it has to do with power going to the printer while it's printing, or network connections, or a network cable is like being pinched. So, I mean, those are like 5 things right there. But I think the person was getting a clean print. But if you're watching this and wondering, that's where you start. Does my print look good? Now with DyeSub, it never looks amazing.
It's not going to be vibrant, but it should be sharp.
It should be sharp. All right, so that's one. Now we move on to the press.
Yeah, so the press would be the next thing. And so the press is doing 2 things. It's I guess 3. It's time, temperature, and pressure. So you would have to look at those 3 variables. And if your pressure isn't adequate for the item that you're pressing, you're going to see where it's a little hazy in different parts of the image. And it could be that one part of the press is applying enough pressure, but maybe not over the full platen. So if you're seeing like a hazy, cloudy image, then pressure or time or temperature could all be the culprit. So you'd look at the pressure, you could look at the temperature. We sell some different heat strips that would allow you to check the pressure, or the temperature across the platen,
right,
that it would be even across the whole platen. So that would be another thing to test. And then it could just be time. If you're not leaving the item in the temperature and the pressure long enough, then you could also not give the ink time to sublimate.
That gave me an idea. I like to bake my bacon, and I feel like there's one part of my oven, and the bacon's always getting really, like, crispy, like too crispy, burnt. So maybe I could take some of those strips, put them in my oven in all the corners.
There you go.
Maybe I could report back on that.
Yeah, let's do that for next episode.
Yeah.
Or maybe you bring a heat press home and try doing your bacon on the heat press.
Hover it for...
Yeah.
There was one other thing when I saw this question, and that is when you are doing something maybe onto like a Chromolux metal or a mug, and you're peeling off the transfer to reveal this amazing vibrant print. Sometimes when it's still hot, the sublimation process is still happening. And if you don't have the right peel, you almost like shift the transfer, and it creates what they call ghosting, because it's not as vibrant as the first one. It looks like there's a ghost of the image. And that could be it. And that is like, I remember the first time I was doing dye sublimation transfers on metal. That kept happening. Yeah. And that was like the main thing.
And the metal's like $1 million per piece.
Right.
So you're like, oh.
And it's 400 degrees. So it's already hot, and you're trying to...
Yeah. So by the end, you're broke and your fingers are burnt. And it's no fun.
All right. So we covered a bunch of different things. First, it was the print. Make sure you look at your print. If it's not your print, then we talked about a second thing, the heat press, time, temperature, pressure. And then we went into the third, which could be letting it cool or the process for removing. So that's 3 options to evaluate why you might be getting blurry prints.
Yeah. You got your print. Is the print clear and quality? You got your pressure, temperature, and time on the heat press, and then ghosting, making sure you're removing that paper while it's still hot, but without sliding it across the surface.
Yep. Well, that's it for this episode of the Extended Gamut.
First episode in the books.
First episode. So hopefully you've learned a few things and enjoyed the extended conversation on today's topics. Find us on all the usual platforms. Let us know if you have topics you'd like us to discuss in the future. The simplest way is to go to itsupplies.com/questions.
Yeah. You submit your question there, and then we're, every episode while we're planning, we're going to go look at those questions, and you guys are the ones that submit the content. So we only talk about the things that you guys want to hear about. Nobody wants to listen to a podcast just with us talking about printing. So if it's not addressing things that you actually care about, then we don't really want to talk about them.
And next episode, hopefully I'll have an update on the bacon situation.
People are going to be sitting by on
the edge of their seats. Yeah. All right.
Don't burn your house down.